We've got Guerre versus Etruia, Etruia versus Entrath, Vrukil versus Entrath. All of these were correct statements. We will see. I believe Guerre is the higher seed here. Yes, he's the fourth place player,
Yes.
so he gets to choose whether to play first or second. And it's nice. Etruia does remember this. Obviously, if you guys slip up on this kind of thing, it's not the end of the world or anything like that.
Yeah, well. Okay, yeah, they got there already. So Entrath able to take the play here.
Yeah. So this is both of these decks are running Gore Feast. The only two Gore Feast in the list of this particular Cup series are right here. And that being said, Entrath only has the one. He is running that typical dwarf aggro. Gotta wonder if he'll be able to beat down, like, outrace Gore Feast here.
Would you even say
Especially,
it's Dwarf Feast?
I wouldn't say it's Dwarf Feast because it's definitely not built around that kind of. The Gore Feast is just a singleton. It's there to help against, just kind of surprise the combat math. I also feel like there's a second one in his reserves that he plays against slower decks. I wouldn't be surprised if Gore Feast actually comes out of Guerre's deck in this matchup between rounds, but we'll see. It really depends on how he takes down or gets taken down in the first round. We do see that Mimeobot hit the board. That Mimeobot will put two replicas of a troop in his hand, in Guerre's hand, into his deck, just giving him more gas to draw into. Gorefeast Dwarf sounds ace though. Yeah, there was a time where Dwarf Feast was a little more relevant. Construct Foreman hits the board. It's going to turn that Mimeobot, a normally useless 1/1, into a 3/3. Had Etruia led with, you could see him pointing it out, had he led with the Ruby Shard and had Burn available there, he would have been able to burn the Mimeobot in response, not only stopping himself from taking 3 damage this turn, but significantly lowering the board presence of Entrath here. Entrath, of course, having put in 2 turns 5 cards out onto the board already, 2 shards, a Mimeobot, a Construct Foreman, and a Charge Bot. Looks to be missing Sapphire, but at the same time not hurting for board position here. And even more insult to injury, that Sapphire Shard comes off of the top, which means that had Etruia led with the Ruby Shard on turn 1 and had Burn available, that things would have played out okay for him. Would have had the Sapphire to play the Cerulean Mirror Knight on turn 2 anyway. Obviously, you can't know that ahead of time, and would have been a risk one way or the other. So Cerulean Mirror Knight hits the board. That'll block up the field from the Construct Foreman and the Charge Bot at the very least. They should have a harder time swinging in, but that Hornet Bot plans will give them something to do. It's very likely the Warbot will just swing in here and take the damage. Guerre not dropping a shard and not on Sapphire for his charge power yet. One of the notable, I'm not sure if it's really a weakness or just a facet of the deck really, is that it only has 18 shards, the dwarf deck. Especially Guerre's list only has 18 shards and no dual shards. So it's very difficult to get all your thresholds and things online. And Guerre has a couple of higher cost cards that could be hanging out in that hand and just maybe creating problems for him here. Like he can't play a Slaughter Gear for a long time here.
Of note, that 18 shards is the number of shards that Kaldheim's version of the robot aggro deck, Black Rogers in the Shard Cup, had 23.
It's true.
The other thing that's notable is that in Entrath's version of the deck here, he has no removal in the main deck. He's just got all aggression.
Yeah, it's all about beating down the opponent on turn 1. That's actually probably the strongest card for Entrath in this scenario is those Warhawk plans. It's likely he'll swing in here with the Buzz Buzz and the Warbot, and he does. Gets through with the Warbot for another 3 damage. Will take Etruia down to 11, which is a scary spot to be in. But waiting until the combat phase to catch that Hornet bot with the burn, at the very least allowed Etruia to avoid a counter being put on the construction plans there. Well, and there's a card to come off the top. Royal Falconer, fairly decent here, going to create three cards, all three of which will be inspired by the Cerulean Mirror Knight, which is the ideal scenario. Really, Etruia needs more cards, needs some sort of presence, but at the same time, with that Warhulk a couple of turns away and Entrath stuck on two, that actually might have just been all Etruia needs to finish this game. It really depends on what else we see hit the board in this next turn.
That really was the best top deck possible in that spot.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
with no champion activation, if you're Entrath, your spidey senses might be tingling here that something's up.
yeah. Well, and Entrath does cover a lot of bases here. Puts down the War Machinist and the Charge Bot. The Charge Bot will gain a charge, and the War Machinist will deal one damage to Etruia based on its ability. But more importantly, he now has enough resources to complete the Warhulk in one turn. And the reason that that matters here is because two turns of aerial assault with Gorefeast were more than enough to win this match. And just swings with the Warbot. Now Etruia, of course, still in a bit of a risky position, has to decide whether or not, oh, is going to double block. Is going to give up the Cerulean Mentalist and one of the Falcons here. Gets to draw a card when the Falcon dies. Finds another shard. Definitely not what he's looking for there. He was thinking about saying oops. I think he might have thought the Falcons had two defense there for just like a split second. Finds a Buccaneer. Would have been a lot more solid of a Buccaneer play here if he still had the
The Mirror Knight
Mentalist
out
on,
there.
yeah, the Mirror Knight on board. Um,
Yeah, it's a little surprising to see the block with the Falcon there. Because if you take the three there, you could go to seven, and you still have at least 14 that you can swing back in the air.
yeah, the problem really was that Entrath's board was representing lethal next turn. The
Right? He's
five
gonna
five
have the
crush, the
5/5
3/3.
crush.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Etruia needed a couple of blockers left. Needed to throw something in there. Maybe should have chumped with just the CMK was at least something that comes to mind. Uh, that being said, he had recognized his misplay, said oops in chat. No need to dwell on it. The
Right.
Machinist goes back to hand here with the Buccaneer. That sweet alternate art Buccaneer. The Falcon goes in here. Chooses not to use the Blaze Elemental and Gore Feast here, which is fine because at worst that Warhulk is going in and the War Machinist comes back. A Sapphire Shard gets play. Like the most damage he can really take on this next turn is 8 or 9. He should be able to survive this turn, and in order to take all that damage, Entrath has to go all in on this play. And it looks like he's just going to replay the War Machine. He still hasn't found a third shard. 10 cards down into his deck. Well, 12 cards down because he added two replicas to his deck. Gory leaves behind one charge bot here. This is just going to be 6 damage to Etruia's face. There's probably a top deck that helps here. I can't think of one. Even or another Royal Falconer doesn't leave you with enough defense to get rid of that Warhulk and stay alive, does it?
So
Another Buccaneer would be
perhaps
nice.
a Buccaneer or Time Ripple. Yeah. Not what we see here, but it's
Interesting that he's choosing to play the Shard first. Well, no, I suppose he has to. He's going to play the Mentalist and likely the Blaze Elemental here. He's gotta find a shard, right? That's not a shard, a time ripple, or yeah. Just goes in with the blaze elemental. Entrath chooses to take the damage here too, and that allows the tree to draw a card. It's not the card he's looking for. It's got enough defense to survive this turn, I believe, and could theoretically kill the Warhulk. But there's the Sapphire Shard. That actually changes a lot of things. It allows the charge power to come in. That's an extra point of damage from the War Machinist. The Gearsmith to be played. That might find another artifact out of the deck. And if we watch Entrath's deck size, we can see, yeah, he does find a artifact. It's a Hornet Bot Plans that he can now play for free, or that was a one cost one, and a Terrabot, yeah. So he's just going to slowly ping Etruia to death. Yeah, there we go, with all of the artifacts and the War Machinist, thus ending game one of this top eight match.
Man, that War Machinist. Every time we watch these matches with the dwarves, it does so much damage if you just let it sit out there. Was it? It was at least 5 that game. I didn't keep track exactly, but it was a lot of damage out of your one drop. So when we look at the cards that are listed, because we do have the full deck list here, kind of interesting. See, Etruia with 4 heat waves. Also has some additional removal with Crackling Bolt and Burn. All of those seem fairly likely here. Possibly even Time Ripple. Not sure if Etruia would do that or not. From over on Entrath's side, things are really interesting. We alluded to this a little bit earlier. He's got the Gore Feast, which probably doesn't come in here, but very interesting choices. He's got 3 Crushing Blows, 4 Burns, 2 Suppressive Fires, a Time Ripple, and the 4 Verdicts. Could end up using any or all of those in this matchup, depending on what he wants to do here, because he's got certainly good burn targets, and also being able to take out the blockers with Suppressing Fire or Crushing Blow all seem like pretty good choices here. I don't know. I think I might just mix it up if I was Guerre there.
Certainly possible.
Just giving our players a minute here to do their reserves changes.
Ginger ale, delicious.
What's delicious there, Penta?
Ginger ale.
Ah. It's tea for me this morning. This afternoon, I should say. Looks like, oh, no, that's not one of the players. Never mind. A few of our people in the chat there talking about their experiences from yesterday there. All right. Brukiel is ready to go. Let's challenge Guerre, and we'll get this next game started. Going to be on the play this time.
which for which in that last game actually would have drastically changed things, allowing
It
him
really
to play.
does. This is a matchup where being on the play is a huge advantage. Being able to start deploying your threats there sooner, especially when with Etruia, who's got a lot of four drops that needs to be able to be played. That's pretty important.
Oh, it's an interesting opening hand, especially on the play. I think the
I mean,
burn
it's
makes that capable to me. I think I would take the risk. The
yeah, I think I
burn,
would.
yeah, the burn would have been so good on turn one last time. The decks do have plenty of Sapphire, so it's a risky keep at the very worst, though.
I mean, if you get any shard at all, you have at least two plays. So I think I would keep this as well.
Yeah.
And it's got
One sap.
everything that you want if you do get the sapphire that you want there.
Yeah. If he draws a cut Sapphire next turn, he's going to be in a little bit of a worse position. But if he draws just a raw Sapphire, just like the regular Sapphire shard, he'll be fine. And then curve out like a boss. Hex Geode will get that Sapphire threshold. Entrath this time won't be hurting for which shards he has and doesn't have. Interestingly enough, that actually really does hurt the burn because a construct form and follow up here can turn that geode and will certainly turn that geode into a warbot, and that's not burnable. We see a turn Gearsmith though, not the Foreman, which is probably probably everything Etruia could hope for. Sadly, for Etruia, that Mimeobot is found by the Gearsmith, which will then get played and uh, put two replicas of a card in Entrath's hand into his deck. Did his deck size go up there though?
It did.
Yeah, it did.
Yep. It is hard to tell because he got some extra cards there from the Gearsmith already.
Hmm. Not a Sapphire Shard, and probably one of the weaker draws for Etruia here. The counter magic does require that double Sapphire threshold, so it's waiting on two shards in a row. Probably an okay card in this matchup, but hard to tell how it can perform here. We see Entrath tunneling a card. His list does have a couple of different tunnelers. It's not the that is not guaranteed to be the Mega Hulk that we've seen. But if it is a Mega Hulk, you have to imagine a trio wants to burn a troop here badly.
Yeah, I think all things considered, I would probably just go ahead and go for it there as well. Because I mean, if it is either one, it is you're not going to burn out the troop that's going to come out of tunnel.
Well, just to rub a little salt in the wounds, I suppose. There's a counter magic. At this point, any shard is good next turn, allowing the play of Royal Falconer.
Let's see another Gearsmith.
Yeah.
And the Gearsmith does hit again. We're hitting on
Yeah.
all cylinders here so far to start this match.
It's hard for Gearsmith to miss, especially with that Mimeobot adding two more replicas to the deck. The replicas are considered artifacts. Well, they're not just considered artifacts; they are, in fact, artifacts. But um, Gearsmith is a surprisingly strong card when it works. Like it's scary how powerful that card would be if it said, "Look at the top five cards." Now we see the swing. Etruia once again getting the choice of a possible burn here. You're just gonna let it go through.
Some friendly banter between the players here.
Yeah. Once again, going to pass off the turn. No play, no burn. Now for the moment of truth, and that's that is making the hand feel a little bit worse for Etruia. Not able to play anything on turns 1 through 4 despite being on the play. It's a really rough situation here for him. That tunneling troop gets to 2 counters. There's been a couple of dwarfs and robots on the board. Could be Reese, could be Tectonic Mega Hulk.
See another tunneler here. So, it's interesting. Guer didn't play another troop this last turn, even though he did hit on the Gearsmith.
Which means a couple of things, really. It could be a Terrabot, which would only have
Could
been
be
playable just there.
right. Might be the Terrabot, might be the Slaughter Gear, possibly. And if he didn't play it again this turn, I'm wondering if maybe that second tunnel troop might be a Reese there.
Well, one of them's a Reese and one of them's a Mega Hulk. There's no other options. Another burn off the top.
The reason I'm thinking Reese on the second one is if you got a big artifact that you couldn't play the last turn, and then you tunneled something else this turn, what would be better than a big Terrabot, for example? Maybe that's where he just topped in the Reese there.
Also entirely possible that he's got 2 Reeses tunneled right now.
Except it's not 2 Reeses.
It could be.
Come on.
No, it could be. No, it could be. He played the Mimeobot. Replicas don't have
That's
the unique
fair.
tag.
That's fair. No, that's fair. Maybe he
So
had
if he
two.
mimioed the Reese in his hand. Yeah.
Yeah,
Look,
that's fair.
the chat knew what was going on. Come on, Penta. Named
Penta's
yourself
ready
after...
with that bang.
Yeah. Got your named yourself after a hex card, man. You should know how these interactions work. You wouldn't need to
Not too
tunnel
many.
the second one, is true. He swings in here with the Gearsmith. Fortunately for Etruia, at the very least, Guer appears to have flooded out as far as his deck is concerned. That being said, 3 counters on... No matter what that is, it's coming up next turn. That first one has to be Reese, if my math is correct. Yeah, wow. If the counter magics were open, the tunneling troops wouldn't be that big of a deal, and the ground troops that Entrath has put onto the board don't really fare that well against even just Mirror Knights and Buccaneers, so this could have been a totally different game with the Sapphire. And, well, actually, that first troop was the Tectonic Mega Hulk. It must either be one... I think it's probably in that situation where that is... Its tunneling has now gone below the tunneling counters, but it didn't surface, as it is wont to
Right,
do
the order
sometimes.
of the triggering. Yeah.
Yeah. And a heat... Is there heat waves in Etruia's... Oh, okay.
He has heat waves in the reserves, but
A heat wave would have been not the... Actually, a heat wave would still kill him, wouldn't it? Because that has to surface next turn. That's game. Probably Vrukil in chat saying it was a thing. Probably should have mulled, but the shard luck was surprising regardless. Seraph MTG saying that's not a thing. That is Kaldheim, who likes to play this deck a lot. I promise you with 100% certainty, Kaldheim, not to tell you how your own deck works, that there are times where you can have tunneling X and then have counters with X+1 on them, and it won't surface. I assure you that that can happen. It's a bug, and it absolutely shouldn't ever happen, but it does. I'm not sure that's actually what happened there, but it can happen. So that was a a strong round one from Entrath. That dwarf deck getting there again, possibly putting itself into the position to take down the Blood Cup just after taking down the Cup of Fate.